Generative AI. It's the new tech fad that's changing the world, increasing the effects of climate change by increasing our water and power usage. But genuinely, this is a conversation that we have to have. For many people, generative AI tools open a world of creation to them, gives them access to fast, easy, cheap creative assets and ideas, even code. But for other folks, it represents a theft of their abilities and talents, a devaluing of their work, and the funneling of profits into CEOs and tech entrepreneurs that they had nothing to do with and did not consent to give money to. So it's tough. But as tempting as it can be to walk that yellow brick road of tech hype to the wizard of generative AI, there might be something worth looking at behind the curtain, which is why our next speakers are here. They would like to be able to focus a little bit on the effects of generative AI, particularly on marginalized communities and on the world at large. So please welcome to the stage from Star Yoke Games, Dakota Hernandez, and GDOC Expo's very own Alexia Mohabir.
Hello, I'm Alexia. I'm an artist, designer, and game dev.
And I'm Dakota, a programmer, educator, and game dev.
This is our talk, Generating Hope in an AI Hellscape.
So, what is generative AI? Well, it's a form of artificial intelligence that uses a generative model to create text, images, videos, and more. The generative models are built by providing training data for it to learn patterns from, and then, based on prompts or algorithms, new data with similar characteristics to the training data will be generated. To give an example, OpenAI as a company has a series of GPT models, and these are used to power the DALL-E image generator, the ChatGPT chatbot, the Sora video generator, which is upcoming, but also things from other companies like Microsoft Copilot and GitHub Copilot. And generative AI is being used in a lot of different forms now. So for example, you have chatbots like the aforementioned ChatGPT, but also Google's Gemini. We have text to image, if you've heard the term AI art, things like DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, or Midjourney, right? That's where that comes from. And even generative audio, things like Suno AI or Udio for music, or 15.ai for voice acting. And there's been a lot of hype around GenAI recently. So for example, back in January 2024, the Square Enix president, Takashi Kiryu, said that the company intended to be aggressive in applying AI to game dev. We see that the game Foam Stars actually had used Midjourney in order to create the in-game album art. Microsoft has teamed up with In-World AI for a big partnership in AI dev tools for design copilots, character runtime engines. NVIDIA has been a big player in this space too, with their Avatar Cloud Engine demo in order to make dynamic NPC responses to player actions, and in general has just been really busy for pushing the AI tech. For example, the CEO mentioned that everyone in the company will have an AI assistant. There's that much belief in that tech. Really feels like this AI stuff is like some all-powerful magical wizard who can do everything, right? It can do code, it can do art, it can do music. It's perfect, right?
Well, not exactly. There's definitely more than meets the eye. So let's take a look behind the curtain.
So I was told that GenAI could create new content on its own. What's to do with that?
In reality, GenAI can't create something from nothing. It needs training data, prompts, and often human fine-tuning to produce usable results. Continuously, the conversation is framed as GenAI replacing creators, like replacing artists to make art. But in reality, AI art isn't something that is used instead of an artist. It needs existing artwork to function. It literally cannot exist without feeding it the existing art.
Well, even so, GenAI is smart, right? Supposedly can think and make content just like a human.
In reality, GenAI can't create with intention or perspective. It replicates patterns based on a generative model. Even if a human copies another work, what they bring to their work affects the outcome. AI is trying to just replicate those patterns based on provided data. It does not think, it does not know what is accurate or true or desired. It's not a magical all-knowing entity, and it's certainly not equivalent to a human being.
Oh, well, but hey, that's not a big deal. We use AI all the time. Isn't GenAI just another form of that? What's the worry?
The reality is that not all AI is created or used equally. In games, AI often means algorithms for things like enemy patterns, NPC behaviors, or procedural generation. But generative AI is kind of something different. It's marketed and sold as just AI, but it's utilized to kind of hide its distinct problems and negative impacts compared to other AI tech.
So let's go over some of those problems, shall we?
So let's discuss the impacts on creators. We mentioned that GenAI models need training data to work. So where are they getting the training data from? Well, they scrape data from online sources. This includes things like Common Crawl, a nonprofit web archive originally designed for research, YouTube videos, GitHub repositories, and artwork posted online. But this is often done without the consent or compensation of creators whose works are used to train the models. For example, take the case of the China-born Singaporean photographer known as Zmotion online, whose work was used over 20,000 times on Midjourney. She discusses how dehumanizing it is to have her name and her work used as a way to generate content without pay or permission. GenAI ignores creators' rights to use their work, their agency over who uses it, and how it's used. And that impacts not just the creator, but how an audience views and interacts with creators and their work. Who a creator is, their experiences, influences, values all get pulled from them and fed into a machine, and their personhood is ignored. And people often see their work as something that they could just make something instant out of and don't really have to interact with them or respect what they want out of their work. Of course, this disproportionately impacts marginalized creators. So here's an example of some of the prompts people were using when trying to replicate Zmotion's work. You have descriptions like a Chinese beauty with black hair, red lipstick, and delicate features. To generate the type of work that people want, it often encourages a simplification of personhood that boils down artist work into stereotypes. Let's look at another example. Kim Jung-gi was a South Korean illustrator, cartoonist, and manhwa artist who died in 2022 at age 47. He was famous for his large, highly detailed illustrations, often drawn only from memory. Just 3 days after he died, a former French game developer known online as 5U announced that he had released a tool based on GenAI model Stable Diffusion that could generate images in Kim's iconic style with a text prompt. 5U described the tool as an homage, encouraging users to feel free to use it as long as they credited him, the creator of the tool. In Leo Kim's article about this situation, he states, "New technology is not ideologically neutral. These tools latch onto and aggravate existing structural inequalities. Image generators like Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, and others are poised to do the same, creating new avenues of exploitation while also reinforcing our existing biases. It's not just their art, but the artists themselves that are now appropriated, pacified, transformed into a pure tool, made manipulable for anyone who might be so inclined."
It is not just individual creators who are impacted, it's our whole industry. The use of these GenAI tools normalize large-scale theft and loss of agency and ownership over our work that disproportionately impacts marginalized creators. Just look at these examples of various artists who had to suddenly learn that Adobe's AI tools were scraping their art without permission, without compensation, right? And although companies may claim to be handling these things ethically, their actions tend to suggest otherwise. For example, when Adobe released its Firefly image generating software last year, they claimed that the AI model was trained mainly on Adobe stock, but it was actually trained quite significantly on things like Midjourney. So, not exactly ethical. We can also see problems with how Google's handling things. For example, saying that it'll read your message histories to personalize responses. So reading from potentially private data, and Meta executives and lawyers weighing the possibility of putting copyrighted works into their AI model, even if it meant they'd be sued. and they're just going to try to eat the risk. These are not great.
In reality, GenAI does not replace workers, it is used to undermine them. GenAI is used to pretend our skills and labor are easily replaceable so it can devalue them. And it lowers the bar of acceptable quality while pretending it's just as good as we are. This all worsens working conditions, wage theft, and further exploitative practices such as crunch to actually still do the work, i.e., paying you less for the same skills and arguably more work, which once again disproportionately impacts marginalized creators. Here's a quote from a writer that was part of the writer strike against a lot of the use of AI in studios. The studios will use AI text generators to produce a script, however shoddy, and then hire us to do rewrites of that material, which they're going to treat as source material. Studios pay lower rates for script rewrites, and many writers worry it would actually be more work for them to correct and improve the boilerplate output. So it's simply a way for the industry to slash pay and break worker power. So you could see here, just in the context, the companies are utilizing it to force them into a role where they're still doing the writing, they're still doing the work, but they're able to pay them less and argue that they're really not doing it. And this is not just a thing in animation and in the context of writers' unions and stuff like that. It is a broad thing across a variety of industries, including the games industry.
Meanwhile, we have companies creating AI influencers and models and such who are amassing huge followings, working with major brands, or putting out their own music or podcasts. For example, look at Shudu. She's being touted as the world's first digital supermodel, and Shudu is a creation of the British fashion photographer Cameron James Wilson, who was commissioned by a fashion label, Balmain, to design a diverse mix of digital models called the Digitals. So we have a fake model who is created to add diversity instead of just hiring a marginalized person for this role or any of these kind of roles.
In reality, GenAI is used to steal marginalized perspectives, faces, voices, and cultures to sell back to us. It does not democratize creating. It furthers systemic exploitation, inequality, and dehumanization of Western capitalism. You have examples like Levi making an AI model to add diversity, being pushed as kind of like digital blackface, essentially. Instead of hiring Black models or other diverse people, you have companies created and owned mostly by powerful white people who are creating fake people based on us to sell product. You have the example recently that the NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick raised $4 million to create AI comics. And as people point out, you could have used that $4 million to actually pay, hire, and support POC comics creators. But instead, this is going to a technology that is pulling from all of that existing work and then selling it back to us. Here's another quote from a writer, part of the writer strike against AI, that I think sums up everything quite well. There is no ethical way to use the major AI generators. All of them are trained on stolen images, and all of them are built for the purpose of de-skilling, disempowering, and replacing real human artists.
And outside our industry, GenAI still presents clear dangers to society at large. An improper curation of training data can lead to misinformation, like how this Reddit joke on mixing glue with pizza sauce gets regurgitated by an AI search as fact. Thanks, Google Gemini, for doing a valuable service that we don't need. And sure, sometimes we can get funny stuff like the Pope over here in a puffy jacket as created by Midjourney, but this just highlights the fact that these tools can be used to create new misinformation even if the data itself is fine. Like, again, creating seemingly realistic images of fake events, or deep fakes, which are used to imitate people's voices and likenesses, often without permission, which could lead to lots of problems like stealing your data or portraying people in compromising situations which actually did not happen. And unsurprisingly, we see these tools being used to exacerbate existing societal biases and stereotypes. Take the example here of Meta's Galactic AI spewing horrific anti-Semitic garbage while trying to sound authoritative, scientific, and being touted as this sort of educational tool. And of course, bad data can make things even worse. For example, Microsoft's Tay.ai was reading in prejudiced materials from Twitter and became horrifically offensive. Unsurprisingly, as shown by these examples, these are things that disproportionately harm marginalized people. And even if we had good data, even if all of those problems were solved, we got to talk about the energy usage because GenAI requires massive amounts of energy to use, which hastens climate change. Now, while most AI companies haven't disclosed their emissions reports, we have a few that have, and things aren't looking good. Both Google and Microsoft were aiming to be either have net zero emissions or even go carbon negative by 2030. But the use of AI tools and AI generation has caused both of these companies to increase their emissions. Google emissions rose 13% year over year in 2023, up 48% from 2019. Meanwhile, Microsoft emissions have raised 29% since 2020. And AI tools like ChatGPT are causing water usage to skyrocket as well. For example, we have reports of a Microsoft water usage plant for use for cooling tech that has shot up over a third, 34%, and can fill 2,500 Olympic-sized pools. Now, climate change is going to be disastrous for us all, but it also affects the most marginalized, those in the global south. So this isn't just an isolated problem. This is something that affects everyone, especially marginalized communities. And the simple reality is that across multiple fronts, GenAI is bad. But what do we do about it? Because we are actually powerless to stopping bad tech. We just got to know what to do. So what can we do? So firstly, you got to use your brain. Don't just follow the hype. You should be aware of what GenAI can and cannot do, and you should know what it is versus what it isn't. For any dev tool that you might consider, think about where that tool might come from, where any data it might use is pulled from, and what impact it has through what we discussed earlier. This is far from an exhaustive list, but a key takeaway here is to be mindful of your tools and mindful of your work.
You got to have heart. Care about your fellow workers. Where does your labor actually come from? Respect and support the work and workers across industries and mediums, and pay and credit people for their work. And if you can't afford to pay people, there are other options that still respect the labor of your fellow workers. You could do profit share, skill trades. You could use things that are open source, public domain, or free for commercial use content. There are a variety of websites and resources like Pixabay, Unsplash, and various even libraries and museums that have collections that you can pull from. Note that this GenAI impacts every aspect of game development pipeline, writing to art to programming, all the technology, and of course, especially impacts marginalized devs. So it's really important that we stick together and care about one another in the context of how this impacts us.
Then you gotta find the courage within yourself to call out bad tech for what it is. As a player, don't give your time to games using unethical tech like this. As an indie dev, either avoid GenAI tools straight up or don't use any GenAI features that may be integrated into other tools. That applies to industry devs as well, especially those in decision-making positions, but given the threat to workers' rights that GenAI presents, the collective power of a union can also be a powerful tool for fighting back. And be ready to be vocal. Remember how cryptocurrency and NFTs were pushed just a few years ago? Remember when folks rightfully called out their problems and they kind of collapsed? We can make GenAI the new crypto or the new NFT if we're willing to fight for it. And the good news about that is
you already have the power. GenAI gets its training data from human works. You don't need it. It needs you. It's important that we realize that this unethical tech is not inevitable, but it only stays that way if we do not accept it as unavoidable or unnecessary. We can fight back.
And the good news? The tide seemed to be turning. That same Square Enix president pushing for GenAI back in January said as recently as June that the use of AI for creative fields is extremely delicate and plans on focusing on public opinion on the tech going forward. Meanwhile, NVIDIA is facing production delays on its Blackwell AI chips, which can really impact the adoption and push for that tech in the short term. We have new anti-Gen AI technologies in spaces that help with countering the theft of AI art, including Glaze, Nightshade, and a whole social media founded by Zmotion called Kara. Meanwhile, as we are speaking, the Screen Actors Guild are striking against the game industry over worker protections over the use of their voices for AI. Not to mention various class action lawsuits by affected artists, the New York Times, and big companies against tech companies who are using their information for their AI generation without their permission. The key takeaway here is that we can make things better, but we can't ignore it. We have to keep fighting for and pushing for ethical uses of tech in our industries.
Remember, there's no place like home without one another. It's important that we care about each other and fight for one another in the context of how this is going to impact us as individuals, as an industry, and as a society at large. Thank you.
Thank you.
Even in an AI hellscape, people have power when they work together. Square Enix walking back that AI statement, those other big company measures, that's people power hard at work. Also, now you get why I made that Yellow Brick Road reference in the intro. I was foreshadowing the technique. I got those. Thank you so much for that informative talk, Alexia and Dakota. If you'd like to keep up with them, you can find them both on the Bird site. Find Dakota at Volcanic Dynamo. You can find Alexia at Whoa and Grow, or anywhere you find Game Devs of Color Expo social media. Thank you so much for all of your hard work, Alexia, and thank you for the talk.